Kings, emperors, and world leaders are usually remembered as powerful figures. We imagine them leading armies, shaping nations, and standing proudly in the pages of history. But history has another side, a much stranger side. Because sometimes the people who ruled entire countries ended up in situations that were unbelievably bizarre. Some died in ridiculous accidents. Some behaved in ways so strange that people still talk about it centuries later. From a king who literally ate himself to death, to an emperor defeated by a river, to a ruler who believed he might shatter like a wine glass, and finally, the king whose life ended because of a fight between a dog and a monkey. These are some of the strangest and most embarrassing stories involving powerful leaders in history. Let's begin with a royal dinner that went very, very wrong. The story is often remembered as the king who ate himself to death. In the year 1771, Adolf Frederick of Sweden sat down for dinner. Now, kings have always enjoyed extravagant meals. Royal banquets were designed to show power, wealth, and luxury. But this particular dinner turned into something closer to a competitive eating contest. The king began with lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked fish, and large amounts of champagne. At this point, most people would politely lean back in their chair and declare themselves full. But King Adolf Frederick apparently saw this as merely the opening round. Then came dessert, a traditional Swedish treat called semla. A semla is a soft bun filled with almond paste and topped with whipped cream. It's rich, sweet, and incredibly filling. Most people enjoy one, maybe two if they're feeling adventurous. King Adolf Frederick ate 14. 14! At this point, the royal kitchen staff were probably watching in horror as the king continued eating like a man determined to defeat pastry itself. Unfortunately, his body had other plans. Soon afterward, the king began suffering severe if you do. His body simply could not process the enormous amount of food he had consumed. And shortly after that historic meal, the king died. To this day, historians refer to him as the king who ate himself to death, which makes him possibly the only ruler in history defeated not by war, rebellion, or assassination, but by dessert. Now, let's move from royal dining halls to a medieval military expedition that ended in a surprisingly wet disaster. This is the story of the emperor who drowned in a river. In the year 1190, Europe was in the middle of the Third Crusade. One of the most powerful leaders involved was the legendary Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa. Barbarossa was a towering figure in medieval politics. He had ruled for decades and commanded enormous respect across Europe. When he announced he was leading a crusader army to the Holy Land, thousands of soldiers joined him. This was not a small expedition. It was a massive military force marching across continents. The journey took them across mountains, deserts, and hostile territory. But strangely enough, the emperor's greatest enemy would not be an opposing army. It would be a river. At one point during the march, the army needed to cross a river in what is now Turkey. The crossing didn't seem particularly dramatic. Compared to battlefields and sieges, it probably seemed like a routine part of the journey. Barbarossa attempted to cross the river on horseback, but something went terribly wrong. He fell into the water. And because medieval armor was essentially the fashion equivalent of wearing a small metal house, he quickly began to sink. His soldiers rushed to rescue him, but before they could reach him, the emperor drowned. After surviving decades of wars and political intrigue, one of Europe's most powerful rulers had been defeated by a river crossing. Next, we move to medieval England, where one king's story became one of the strangest assassination legends ever told. This tale is known as the king assassinated in a toilet. The king in question was Edmund II of England. According to some medieval chronicles, his death involved an extremely unusual plan. The story claims an assassin hid beneath a privy which was the medieval version of a toilet. Back then, toilets were simple wooden structures built over pits. Apparently, the assassin climbed into the pit and waited. Then the king arrived. He sat down, and the assassin attacked from below. It's one of the most bizarre assassination stories ever recorded. Historians still debate whether the story is completely true or whether it was exaggerated over time. But regardless of the details, the legend quickly became one of the most infamous royal death stories in English history. Not exactly the glorious ending most kings imagine when they think about their legacy. Now, not every embarrassing moment in history involves death. Sometimes it's simply a story that becomes impossible to forget. Which brings us to the president stuck in a bathtub. The president in question was William Howard Taft. Taft was a respected politician, a future Supreme Court Chief Justice, and the heaviest president in American history. One story from the White House claims that he once got stuck in a bathtub. Yes, the President of the United States stuck in a bathtub. According to the story, servants had to help pull him out. Afterward, the White House reportedly ordered a custom-built extra-large bathtub designed specifically for him. Whether the story has been exaggerated over time is debated. Remains one of the most famous and oddly relatable presidential anecdotes ever told. Proof that even the most powerful people in the world can occasionally find themselves in extremely awkward situations. Next, we meet a king whose problem wasn't food, rivers, or furniture. His problem was glass. This is the strange case of the king who thought he was made of glass. In the 1400s, Charles VI of France developed one of the strangest delusions in royal history. He became convinced that his body was made entirely of glass. He believed that if someone touched him, he might shatter into pieces. Because of this belief, he refused to let people come near him. He wore padded clothing for protection and constantly worried that even the slightest bump might break him. Running a kingdom is difficult under normal circumstances. Running a kingdom while believing you might accidentally shatter like a wine glass is considerably more complicated. This psychological condition later became known as glass delusion. And while a few nobles in medieval Europe experienced it, Charles VI remains the most famous example. Now we arrive at one of the strangest events in church history. A story so bizarre it sounds almost fictional. This event is known as the Pope who put a dead body on trial. In the year 1897, Pope Stephen VI ordered the corpse of the previous pope to be dug up. That corpse belonged to Pope Formosus. The body was dressed in papal robes and placed on a throne. And then the trial began. Yes, a corpse on trial. During the proceedings, a deacon answered questions on behalf of the dead pope. Eventually, the corpse was found guilty. The robes were removed, and the body was thrown into a river. Even by medieval standards, people were shocked. Next comes a reminder that keeping wild animals as royal pets is not always the best idea. This is the king nearly attacked by his pet lion. In medieval times, kings often kept exotic animals as symbols of power. One such ruler was Henry I of England. He maintained a royal menagerie filled with lions, leopards, and other animals. One day, while visiting the enclosure, a lion reportedly became aggressive. For a brief moment, the situation turned extremely dangerous. Fortunately, the king survived. But the incident spread across Europe and became a reminder that even kings should probably maintain a respectful distance from large carnivorous animals. Now we move from medieval oddities to one of the strangest assassinations of the modern era. This is the umbrella assassination. In 1978, Bulgarian writer Georgy Markov was walking across Waterloo Bridge in London. A man brushed past him holding an umbrella. Markov felt a sharp pain in his leg. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a strange accident. But inside that umbrella was a hidden device that fired a tiny pellet containing poison. Within days, Markov was dead. The incident became famous as the Umbrella Murder and remains one of the most unusual assassination methods ever recorded. Finally, we arrive at perhaps the strangest story of them all. A king, a dog, a monkey, and an accident that changed history. This is the king killed by a monkey. In 1920, Alexander I of Greece was walking through the royal gardens near Athens with his dog. Everything seemed peaceful. But suddenly, the dog began fighting with a pet monkey kept in the gardens. Alexander rushed in to separate them. During the chaos, another monkey jumped onto him and bit him several times. At first, the injuries seemed minor, but within days, a severe infection developed. The infection spread through his body and became sepsis. Doctors tried to save him, but antibiotics had not yet been discovered. At just 27 years old, the king died. Some historians believe his death helped trigger political instability in Greece during the Greco-Turkish War, all because of a fight between a dog and a monkey. History often remembers great leaders for their victories, wars, and achievements. But sometimes history remembers them for something else entirely. A strange accident, an embarrassing moment, or a story so bizarre that it sounds like fiction. And as these stories show, even the most powerful people in the world are not immune to history's strangest moments.